My name is Riley Biondo. This is my project for World Civilization 1 Honors, Dr. Trevor Smith's class. My presentation is on the shared origin of the flood in the Book of Genesis and the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, to get started, these are two pictures of the fifth tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh and the oldest surviving Torah that we currently have today. So, the whole point of my presentation is to convince you that the origins of, both of these two stories come from one distinct event that was passed down through the generations, through oral tradition, and eventually, once these two cultures diverged, they wrote down their accounts of the stories with their own morals and their own, let's say, teachings. But relatively, with our historical and archaeological evidence, we know that there was a event that caused both of these stories to happen. Let's start out with some commonalities in these two stories. Obviously, there's a catastrophic flood in both of these. The gods are gods and or just God is angry with civilization and the humans for becoming, in the case of the Bible, becoming corrupted and sinful. So in the Bible, he warns Noah, who he deems excuse me for my stutter. He is chosen to repopulate the earth. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the man who survived the flood is known as Utnapishtim. Both of these two men were tasked with building their own vessels to sail these flooded areas of Mesopotamia, which both of these stories take place. Excuse me. The commonalities in the stories go further than just this. Both of these men, they release birds from their vessels to locate land. In the case of the Epic of Gilgamesh, they release birds in order of smallest to largest. Utnapishtim first releases a dove, which the dove comes back after he releases him, letting him know that there's no land close enough for the dove to perch. He then releases a swallow, which basically does the same thing. And then he finally releases a raven, which never returns, so he knows that there's land nearby. And similarly, in the Old Testament, Noah releases one raven first. It does not come back, so he knows that he can go that direction and there will be land. Then he follows it up by releasing 3 doves. And by the time the third one doesn't come back, he knows that land is close enough for the dove to have perched and he can safely land there. God wants to punish the sinful and the corruption of humanity by purging all of life on earth, while the gods in the Epic of Gilgamesh are annoyed by the noisiness of humans and just want there to be quiet. And to put it in a very simple way of thinking of it. So let's get into the geographical locations. These are just pictures of the vessels in each story. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's the Old Testament. This is a picture of Utnapishtim, and this is a picture of Noah, of course. The location of these stories is Mesopotamia. It's where two large major rivers, known as the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, that's where they reside. These are fertile river valleys that are very flat, and it's also the areas in which these two civilizations or two groups of people live. So there are major bodies of water nearby the Fertile Crescent, as Mesopotamia is also known as. You have the Mediterranean Sea mainly to the west. You have the Black Sea, which is to the northwest. You have the Caspian Sea, which is to the northeast. And then you have the Persian Gulf, which is to the southeast. Let's see here. This is a picture of the Euphrates River. You can see how it has some hills, but it's very just, let's say, flat in all comparison. There's very few mountains. This is a picture of the Tigris River. You can see how flat it is and how easily that everything can flood and just spiral out of control. We have archaeological evidence of flooding in these areas. This isn't just going based off of stories. In 1929, a man named Leonard Woolley, let me make sure I got that right. Leonard Woolley, as he was excavating ancient Sumerian cities, he noticed that there is a layer of pure mud, and above it there's remnants of architecture, of archaeological artifacts, and there's also a layer below it with the same things, indicating that there is a flood that essentially wiped out the settlement and made everyone have to start from scratch, basically. There are exposed rock faces that you can see the flood deposits, and some of them are about a foot thick, and some can be around a meter thick. There's one specifically from, sorry for looking down at the paper, the ancient Sumerian city of Shuruppak, I think that's how you pronounce it, that has been dated to around the date of 2900 BC. This is a picture of the excavation where they found this layer. Let's talk about oral traditions. Oral traditions may not be the most reliable source of information. Definitely not by itself. Them by themselves are not useful to creating concrete evidence of an event, let's say. But when you have the information, when you have historical evidence and archaeological evidence that supports the stories that happens in these oral traditions, then you can create a very well-rounded idea of what life in these ancient times and these ancient cultures had to deal with, let's say. That's why I believe I said it, I'm sorry. Scratch that last part, I'm already so far into this. The basis of the Epic of Gilgamesh and the flood in the Book of Genesis are most likely stemming from the culture and the survivors, aka the chieftain, which could have been Noah or Utnapishtim, however you look at it, that survived by using his brain and building a vessel, and he taught that to be prepared to his younger generations. These floods are not just a Mesopotamian thing. They've happened all throughout ancient history, through modern history, and it's foolish to say that all the oral traditions of such floods are to be false. We wouldn't say that without having evidence. We wouldn't just say that, let's say, the Mayans have no backing that their culture had experienced a devastating flood like they say they have in oral traditions. So it's even worse to explain that the Hebrews and the Sumerians / Babylonians did not have the basis to claim that those events were real, even though they have solid geological and archaeological evidence to support both of those statements. Excuse me. I want to talk about the Olmecs and their culture, which was passed down to the Mayans and then later the Aztecs. They tell similar flood stories. And this is not to say that the worldwide flood of the Bible was a realistic thing, but it is to say that oral traditions can be passed down through millennia to different cultures who stem from one central kind of origin, you know what I'm saying? So, if the Mayan, or if the Olmecs can pass down their traditions to the Mayans, it would be easy to say that the ancestors of the Sumerians and the Hebrews could have done the same thing. Floods still happen to this day in the Himalayas. They're caused by monsoons. That's just one example. Of course, India is riddled with their own floods. They even have their own oral traditions in Hinduism, as well as the previously stated Olmecs, Mayans, and Aztecs. And this is all to come to the conclusion that the stories of the Old Testament and the Epic of Gilgamesh floods were sourced by one event that led the survivors to share the stories and pass them down through generations, eventually creating two different stories that are meant to teach through using an event that their ancestors had learned from. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.